September 29, Budget Committee mid-year meeting.
That's hours burning midnight. That's about the longest. Hey, how are you? Oh, they had a switch. I just said nice. I didn't get one response. I think it said one.
I'll give people another minute to get settled.
How are you, young lady? Did your husband or you drop off apples at my door today? Did you drop off some apples? Somebody found a bag of apples on our front door now.
No, it
Was
wasn't us.
trying to think of.
You can have some, you can have some though if you want.
I think we got it.
Could have been, but it wasn't.
Oh, no worries. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can call the meeting to order. It's about 6:30, 6:33. The notice, as you can see, this is a mask optional. Please feel free to wear your mask or not. You can wear a mask and take it off if you want to speak. I guess the important thing is we still have to keep our social distancing. And oftentimes I ask people to project, but this time maybe you don't need to project quite so much to keep those aerosols down. Not really projecting somebody's face. Otherwise, I think we're good to go. This is a review of the budgets. And I'm going to leave the minutes and the electing of officers to the end, so we can do the work while we have the people here who, want to give us some input. The school budget is the end of their fiscal year, so we're reviewing the outcome of the whole year. And the town budget is roughly halfway through their year. The town budget works on a calendar year, so we probably up through the end of August, maybe September might be a little early. So we're reviewing 2/3 of the town budget and I think the whole school budget. So with that, I'd like to recognize our school department. We have our principal here and I think our new administrator.
Yes, I'm Susan Penny.
Susan, thank you. Welcome, Susan, for coming.
Thank you.
And we'd be interested in just telling us, I guess, how this school year went, what you anticipate the budget needs in the coming. You already have your new budget, but I mean, what you anticipate in the future, at least, of what your expenditure might be.
Well, I just started in July 26th,
Mhm.
and I guess I'll give you a few highlights of last year. The DOE 25 was submitted on time, and we returned about $234,666 to offset taxes. And we are just starting the fiscal year 23 budget, and the budget process, and we're just starting really, the new budget started on July 1st, so far there's no surprises.
I mean, just the basic ones, what is your enrollment this year?
We have 51 students.
51, okay.
Yep.
And what would you say is the maximum you could absorb with the current staff and facilities?
Yeah, so we, actually, Dr. Joyce and I worked together on this a few summers ago and worked out that it's about 65 students would be
65.
the maximum, given our size of our classrooms and the staffing in our building.
In the staffing, okay. And if I understand you created a separate, was it a 4th grade or something this year?
Separate, so we have, well, yes and no, it's kind of a hybrid.
Okay.
So based on our needs, we have a large kindergarten class for us, a large 1st grade class, but a small 2nd grade class. And that second grade class was also the class that was in kindergarten when we first began this pandemic and kind of working through last year. So we took that small class, and in the mornings when they have their math and reading, they're working independently with a teacher to really focus on some of those gaps, trying to close those in. And then in the afternoons, the reason I say it's a hybrid model is that we have some flexible co-teaching happening. Like right now, the 1st and 2nd grade class is working together for their science and humanities.
Okay. So it's,
really a separate 1st grade, a separate kindergarten, separate 1st grade, and a separate 2nd grade.
yeah. When I went to the Stone School, we had 3 grades in one classroom.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome.
We still have then 3 4s together and 5 6.
3, 4, and 5, 6 paired. And it's basically mostly on class size, perceived needs.
Yeah, we look, I think you've heard me say probably several times year after year in this meeting that we work really hard to make sure every child at Newington gets what they need. So looking at the needs of the individual students, really in their size, is what drives how we do our class makeups.
So how does this budget look? You say you're just starting.
Yeah, but I think that, even though we're just starting, we have to buy all of our supplies right at the beginning of the year. We have to get all of those things. So taking all of that into place and what we've encumbered, I think we're gonna be in very good shape with our budget.
And you don't, yes, go ahead.
John, if I might add, as Susan mentioned, we've had no big surprises so far
Good.
in terms of tuition students moving in at the secondary level or extraordinary special ed expenses. And we've been careful with the capital improvements, and so we don't expect any surprises with a significant capital improvement. And as Susan and Peter mentioned, we're just now beginning to generate the budget for the next year. And as always, we are very conservative with that and insist that every need be documented and carefully planned. And we will continue to do that through our budget cycle this year.
And of course, we'll have ample time to discuss the new budget, when we come before us later in the year. Okay, well, great. Did anyone have questions for the school board or administration? Yes.
Just a quick question, out of 51 students, how many are tuitioned in?
5.
5?
That's lower compared to other years.
Yep, and that also is, I think, taking into account where we are at within our pandemic and such. So we've tried to limit, being very conscientious of community members and class size as well. And being very vigilant on that, because we're still under, social distancing within classrooms and trying to manage that within our school as well.
That being said, did you turn any away?
This year, we did not. We had one that we had turned away last year that came back to us this year.
Okay, any other questions for the school board and staff?
That capacity of 65, does that include social distancing, or does that assume there's no social distancing?
Assumes there's no social distancing.
Okay.
Thank you for that clarification.
There's I believe there's a warrant article last year, Shannon, that was to change the amount that's withheld by the SAU from 2.5% to 5%. And, and Susan mentioned that there was $234,000 that was returned to the town to offset taxes.
That was after there's also, $98,669 that you're retaining, that's 5% of your net assessment.
In addition to the $234,000.
That's correct.
Gotcha. So where did we not spend the budget? Where's the biggest gap in $254,000?
I can answer that.
Okay.
We had a unanticipated surplus in our secondary student tuitions, and also in some special education tuitions that had been settled, if you will.
So that means that the amount that you had budgeted for students to go to Portsmouth Middle, Portsmouth High School did not
And out-of-district special education.
fell short of what budget it was.
Correct. Now, the 200-some thousand, that's being returned to the town, whereas the 90-some thousand is retained by the school district to cover unanticipated emergencies or to modify any tax rate spike, much like the town does on the town side.
Yeah, it's essentially, it's school board equivalent of the unassigned balance. As you say, acts like a shock absorber. But on top of that, you return money to the central town unassigned balance.
Correct.
And the selectmen will talk about that. Part of our strategy going ahead would be to try to keep that shock absorber as big as possible, because we might need it. Okay, good. Any other questions for the schools?
Yes.
Right.
So the 98,000, Susan,
Yes.
that's the surplus. So you keep
No,
that.
the 98,000 is your retained fund balance.
Sorry, I appreciate
That's
it.
okay.
Misspoke. 90,000, is that held for 1 year?
Yes, and then next year, if you retain another 5%, it's on the net assessment of this year.
Coming back to offset tax.
Correct. Whatever your net assessment is that year, it's 5% of that can be retained.
Good, thank you very much.
Okay, any further questions? Yes, go ahead.
I'm just curious if there's been any grants that have come through with regards to, like,
Well, last year you received about $44,595 in grants.
I'm just curious if we're
138,000 of that was the SPSRF funds, which was the $200 per pupil that you received. I don't believe they were eligible for ESSER, 2 or 3 grants here in Newington.
Could you explain what that acronym means to folks?
Which, the ESSER?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Kelly Gillian, our assistant superintendent, can explain that grant for you, sir.
I'm doing it, I'm in charge of these grants. So as you know, there were 3 different acts by Congress, and there's money associated with each one. First one was the CARES Act. The funds associated with that are called ESSER 1. The second has a very long name of coronavirus relief, something, something, something. I apologize, I don't have the acronym down, but, the funds associated with that are called ESSER two. And then you have the American Recovery Act, and the funds associated with that are called ESSER three. Newington did not receive any of those federal monies. The money is based on the calculations that the state does and the federal government does. It's based on your free and reduced numbers. And Newington does not have a high population of those numbers, therefore they didn't qualify for those particular funds.
Did we offer free and reduced services to students in the past 12 months?
Yes.
Without or with grant? If
Excuse me?
we weren't eligible for those grants, did we receive grants to cover those expenses, or were those for free and reduced?
Well,
If you're a free and reduced student, the higher your free and reduced lunch population, the more chances you have of getting these grants. It's a number that gets factored into the calculation of computing what you're eligible for.
I understand. Was there free and reduced services offered to the students in Newington?
They're offered every year, yeah.
Were they given to students in Newington regardless of their status?
Last year.
everyone in Newington for the last 2 years, we have not charged for, based on the government charged any lunch.
Okay.
Is that your question, Brandon?
Yeah, I guess my question is, I think you've been offering free and reduced lunch services and that kind of stuff, but it sounds like we're not able to get federal grants
Because
for
you
that
have,
service.
there's a qualification process.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So so I guess my real question is, where does the money come from to cover those free and reduced services that we're offering that we're not getting grants for?
We get reimbursed for them, right? So through our free and reduced services, if
Mhm.
students in Newington qualify for them, we go through the government, the state, and the state will offset that funding. We just don't reach that threshold of meeting that need for that grant, right? Can you explain that?
And
So
we-
the state has been funding that?
And
Not-
we
not
do
the
get
federal.
money for
Yeah,
those
state.
lunches.
Gotcha,
That's through the child nutrition program.
gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yes, please, Kurt.
John, if I might ask, the free and reduced lunch count acts to the federal government like a proxy for poverty level.
Right.
And that's what would trigger these other federal grants. If our threshold had been met, we would have gotten additional money because of a certain percentage of poverty. We don't qualify for that, but we do qualify for free and reduced expense reimbursement.
Understood, thank you.
Any further questions for the school board? The school staff?
One more, if you don't mind, folks. So the $234,000 surplus return to the town to offset taxes was based upon the students for the upper schools, middle and high school in Portsmouth. I believe, and this is just strictly out of memory, I believe the tuition expense for a student to go to be tuition to Portsmouth Middle, Portsmouth High School from Newington was somewhere either between 15 and 18,000.
That's correct.
Ring a bell?
A little bit higher is right.
Okay, so it's about 10 students, if that was the whole thing, which is probably not.
It wasn't the whole.
But even if it was half of that, even if it was 5 students, how do we miss that? Isn't that something that, how do we overshoot that? How do the town raise that much money for us to say, oh, we missed by 5 kids?
But we had some students move away. We had some
Okay.
students choose to go to private school, and the community is not obligated, nor should we pay for private school out of taxpayer money. We also saved resources from every account available when we were informed that the town valuation was dropping, and we were asked to be conservative in order to return as much as possible to the tax base.
Do you have any idea how much of the savings that you garnered by prudent budgeting attributed,
What's the
contributed to
tuition?
that 234,000?
We could research that and get it right
Are
back to
you
you.
asking about the tuition line? How much?
Sure,
Why
versus
Why
your.
don't we research it and we get back with a detailed list for you?
It's about 84,000 in tuition.
84,000 was the tuition?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other further questions? Okay, thank you very much.
So thank you all.
And staff, appreciate your good work. I'm sure the parents do too.
Well, we appreciate wonderful families and kids that we're educating.
Okay, the next thing is town expenditures and revenues. And as I said, we're about what? We figured
Nice to
at
meet
the end of
everyone.
August for the town. I'll let Mark come up with
If I could just take a moment to introduce the budget committee to our new finance director, Cheryl Bagley, who lives right here in town on Hannah Lane. And I believe, you all,
Welcome.
thank you. I believe we also have some new staff that the budget committee would like to meet. We have Karen Anderson, who you may have met before, who also coordinates with the Economic Development Committee and serves as our assessing coordinator.
Taylor Cooney, she's the new executive assistant over at the police department.
welcome all of you. I hope you'll find this a nice community to work with and live with.
So far.
Okay. The town expenditures and revenue, Martha, I was commenting, I think we've probably done the books through August,
Yes,
and 30th of the fiscal year.
right, through September 22nd, and the budget committee has in your packets, under the town tab, the expenditures to date. Everything is in good shape. We've finished paving some of our roads, as I'm sure you've noticed, Fox Point Road, Airport Road, and Hodgson Farm. Recently, a settlement was reached with Eversource regarding road damage that they've caused, thanks to Mr. Hebert, and that's to the tune of $50,000. Those funds will be used for other road projects that have been already identified in your budget. The Nimble Hill Road from the end of the school driveway up to Fox Point Road, which I'm sure we will all agree is in a bad state of repair. Little Bay Road from Newington Road to where the old construction ended at the transfer station light. And the Patterson Lane section from the railroad tracks to the water. In addition to that, the highway department is working on drainage projects currently, finishing those up before the frost sets in. We are working on cybersecurity analysis proposals. You'll recall that was in our budget for this year. This is a big issue in towns. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen the Peterborough news article in which they lost $2.3 million due to a cyber attack. And finally, the LED project, conversion of town building lights to LED, has been completed this year.
Do you anticipate being able to put that cyber bid out before the end of the fiscal year?
It has been put out and we received the proposals and we're looking through them right now. What was the budget for that? $3,500 for all town departments.
Well spent, I guess. Do you, I guess, they could be specific questions, but I'm gonna try and go for an overview. Do you anticipate this year coming out in good shape? Will you have a surplus? What is your projection for the remainder of the fiscal year?
We expect to have a surplus, although not overwhelming. This year, the town budgets were all cut back significantly because of the concern with COVID. I don't want to speak for the selectmen. We could certainly reply to that question after they've had a chance to discuss.
I sort of jumped into category 3 here, fund balance, and cash position, but, if there's certainly anything else on expenditures, people can certainly ask about that too. But there are no unusual expenditures that this year that you've had or that you see coming up. You haven't had to shuffle money to cover something that you didn't anticipate.
We're pretty safe on that. We were very conservative and the work we've been able to do with bids we got in have been in the line, so I feel safe on that right now, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all right, good. Maybe this is a good time to go into the, unassigned fund balance and cash position. And that says as of August 31st. So if you could give us a description of that. And again, I think everybody knows what the unassigned fund balance is. It's similar with the school rate, which is bigger. And it's not money that they can spend unless it's in the budget. Again, I always emphasize that. The selectmen can't spend money unless it's in the budget. They have to go to a special town meeting to increase the budget. But it is a way for them to manage the tax rate. So with that, I'll let you continue.
So currently, you'll notice in the audit report on page 36 that the unassigned fund balance is coming in at roughly $3 million.
Okay.
Okay. Just as a reminder, because of the EP Newington reduction in value and potential settlements, there is an expected abatement expense which can come out of that $3 million. You'll recall me saying that we always like to keep a $2 million balance to make sure cash flow stays regular and we don't have to borrow. So we also, and so that's the cash position currently is 2.3 million in our account.
But you said 3 million.
So, I'm sorry, to clarify.
Yeah.
At the auditors take a snapshot on
Okay.
December 31st of our total budget, expenditures, revenues, and that's where the $3 million comes into play. As the town budget and cash situation goes through the year, we spend money, and the cash, the actual checking account cash goes down. So currently we're at 2.3 million.
2.3.
Right.
Did you say you have more money when the taxes come in,
Exactly.
and then you spend it down? And what do you expect to be at 2 million by the end of the year, or what is your anticipated unexpended balance by year end?
Potentially 2 million, depending on a
Okay.
settlement with the EP Newington Power Plant.
All right, yeah, okay. But in a sense, if I could describe that, 2 million is kind of a war chest in a way, or a strategic reserve. And it's mostly to make up for a shortfall in taxes or revenue. It can't be spent to increase the budget. As you said, the budget is the budget that we recommend the town votes on. Okay.
Does that mean to say that the selectmen are preparing for an abatement settlement of $1 million?
Potentially, we can't speak to it today, but
We're close to that.
What was the overall tax payment of EP Newington in last fiscal year?
I'm sorry.
What was the overall tax payment of EP Newington property taxes in the year 2020?
They're assessed at 290 million last year, so roughly
209,000.
I'd be guessing, and I don't want to do that, but I can certainly get that number. Thank you.
Karen's gonna write it down.
Can I ask an even more basic question? So I know last year, when we had the 55% tax increase, the rationale for that was the utility settlements, the malls, and the fact that people were concerned that the taxes weren't gonna be paid, and the donor channel stuff. So 2 of those things are off the table, right? So they're no longer issues for us. And we reserved a lot of money because the taxes went up by 55 cents. So what happened to that money that we need to raise our taxes by an additional 61 cents this year? There's a disconnect for me here. And I know, Mark, you sort of, under the cost savings in the departments, there's a lot of missing information in terms of revenue coming in. And so I'm not sure we have the full picture in terms of, you know, the savings that you have here under the COVID grants, the savings here that we don't know about, and sort of the list that you included. So I also am curious in terms of the revenue. I know that the police department brings in revenue, and I think the fire department brings in revenue, and how does that factor into all of this? So I think I need a better understanding of the revenue to understand how we can justify the 61-cent increase.
So I'll start with the first question about the three items last year. So last year, we reduced EP Newington's value from $330 million to $290 million, a $40 million reduction. Part of that, unless Karen corrects me, was used for our tax increase. But now, in 2021, it's expected we are going to have to see a $100 million reduction in the value of EP Newington. So in addition to that 40, we've got another 100 to deal with. And then to deal with your question about revenue. Absolutely, you have a sheet in your packet that talks about all of the revenue for police, fire, and we're on track with revenue. The revenues that were originally proposed and reviewed by the budget committee are still in play. And we don't see any significant changes from those revenues that police and fire and all of the departments are expecting.
So there was 140, I think, right, or 120, I don't remember the number, from the bike path. Is that, because we put money aside for that, right?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I should have stopped. So didn't we put money aside for the safety lane? And so that didn't come to fruition. We didn't have to spend that money. So where is that in terms of the revenue and that's money that we put aside, right?
So the, exactly, there was roughly $100,000, although I could be corrected, that was voted on the year before at town meeting, and that reverted into the general fund, that 100,000. The remainder of the funds were not approved by town meeting, were not, so the revenues and the expenditure washed each other out and were not used. Is that?
It's still, I think, getting to Jen's point, it's still, it doesn't make sense, like, at the onset, because if you talk about $1 million, $100 million, you're talking about 900,000 in revenue to the town. I'm sorry, that's completely incorrect.
It's $2 million that EP Newington gives the town annually.
The 2.2 million is their tax bill for 2021.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. So it is. It's $900,000 in revenue that you're expecting, but that's the only burden that we're being told about. But then there's $100,000 in bike path, $234,000 came back from the school. Fire department saved $150,000 last year. The police department saved $80,000 last year. And it seems like, and plus there's improvements to buildings where the tax base is improved in different places. And it says, at some point it kind of gets a little bit washed out for me. And I say, well, that's the one thing everybody's holding on, and that's what we're expecting. That's not factual. Where's the disconnect?
Great point. So the 900,000 roughly that we saved last year, that all of the departments saved, went into our general fund. And that's why our unassigned fund balance, that usually is 2 million, jumped to 3 million. And thank goodness, because those funds are going to be needed for the town to settle, hopefully, with EP Newington. We have lawsuits for 2019 and 2020 and a rate to agree on for 21 with the power plant.
Can we talk a little bit about sort of the premise of having a $2 million cushion? I don't think that in past administrations it's been that high. And frankly, that number is quite a bit higher than what the state actually recommends. It's somewhere, I think around like 1.2 million is what the state recommends. So I'd like to understand the rationale for that.
Thanks.
In Newington, it's important to have that higher fund balance because you have 3 to 5 major taxpayers that pay a big chunk of the tax bill, of that whole tax. If they don't pay until the very end, and they don't, they wait until the very last day, the cash flow becomes critical. You know, we're talking EP, Sprague, Georgia Pacific, there's a few of them that pay such a large portion. The residents pay right away, and that keeps the cash flow rolling when the tax bills go out. But the biggest tax bills don't get paid until the very last day. So without that fund balance to like balance the end of the year bills, it can be very dangerous.
But this is a story as old as time. I mean, this was only an issue until 3 years ago when we ran out of money and had to take a note to cover the cash flow.
Correct.
So what changed?
The gas pipeline and the bottleneck of gas in Draken, basically. It has changed the value of gas coming through the pipeline and our gas facilities. So, I mean, when I started here 2 years ago, like she said, EP Newington was at 330 million. It's gonna be very likely with the new settlement, under 200. And that's just such a huge drop. The same thing with Sprague.
Well, why does that change the amount the unassigned fund needs to hold?
If they don't have a cushion, the tax rate will have to immediately go up to cover that $10 million in lost revenue that we won't be getting from the power company.
Right, my point, I guess, Chairman, is that would have been the same scenario 5 years ago. We would have had to have a cushion to cover that $10 million drop in appraise.
Well, it's the same cushion. I mean, you know, the money, whatever we don't budget, it goes into the cushion. Now, we've had a big abatement of the Newington Power Station last year, and it looks like we're gonna get an even bigger one this year. So the abatement means that that's money they're not gonna pay us. You know, if they reduce, if they can, and they go to court to do this, you know, when we lose, if they reduce the value another 100 million, that's another 10 million we don't collect, what we did last year.
Right. And the settlement amount, like what we're working on right now that hasn't been finalized, is 19 and 20. We're gonna have to pay them back taxes from 19 and 20. That's gonna take that big chunk of that undesignated fund balance.
And I get that, but the piece is still, I'm sorry if I'm not getting this, but last year, like the donor town, we put, you know, maybe it's, I'd like to understand, of the 55 cents, what pieces did we put towards each one of those functions? Because, you know, the donor town, we raised the taxes a certain percentage, or a certain number, to accommodate for the donor town, which it didn't happen. So that money's sitting there, because we didn't need it. You know, there was nothing to bump it up against.
Right, it was used to
So-
offset the taxes the following year.
I don't know that. That's what I'm trying to figure out, is that I would have expected to see, even with the abatement and the settlement issue, I would have expected to see it either be flat or potentially a decrease, based on how big it was last year, and the fact that, you know, the taxes for the malls came in fine, and then the donor town situation is no longer an issue. So we funded those two risks, I guess maybe a better way of saying it, last year in our tax rate. And they didn't happen. So what happened to that money? Because we funded for it and it never came to fruition, those risks.
If it's okay, I'd like to give the committee a breakdown of why the tax rate increased last year. I can do that next week.
Next week, or next meeting?
It just doesn't seem right to Jen's point though, because like John mentioned, like if they reduce it by 100 million and the $10 million, it's really $1 million, right? Because it's 10 per thousand,
It's 1%.
right?
Yeah,
Right.
1%, not 10%.
So it would be a million,
Yeah.
and then I look at all these different things that are contributing and helping the town, and it seems like it's not a wash, but it's getting close to that. And if that's the only detractor that we're being told is going to raise taxes more so than what we raised them last year, it just doesn't seem like, that doesn't equal out for me, I don't understand.
Maybe Martha can do something that's fairly detailed. I mean, fortunately, our tax base is, I don't know, round numbers, about $1 billion.
And so is our expenditures, which are about 8 million, right?
Yeah.
And what skews this a little bit, which makes it harder to like make it black and white, is this like utility doesn't pay that state education tax. So it shifts the tax rate. You know, the tax rate was $9.89, but the utilities were only paying $7.02. So.
But we gotta be able to figure that out though. I mean, mathematically, you can put that on the
We
spreadsheet.
easily could figure it out.
I think
And
that would
could
be a help if you could.
go right across to show, you know, what happened with local education, state education, where it breaks out with what happened in the county.
And some of this needs to be sort of, even if you do the spreadsheet, it also needs to be time, taking into consideration the time axis.
Right.
Because you mentioned some of this we're gonna have to pay back. And some of it we're gonna have to pay or lose going forward.
The other thing is you mentioned it's an abatement, that's in litigation, I assume, or arbitration anyways, right? And you assume that you're going to end on $1 million, which would be a $100 million reduction in valuation. As an abatement though, which means it gets paid, and then they ask for an abatement, right?
There are many.
You can't challenge your current tax bill, right? You have to pay it and then say, I deserve an abatement.
Exactly.
Okay,
Right.
so that would be 2022, right?
So, well, we're dealing with 19 and 20 right now that were paid, and now we're working on settling those.
Which was 40 million in total valuation. That was 330 to 290,
No, that was 18 settlement.
18, 19.
Yeah.
Gotcha, so in 2 years' time, they expect the valuation to go down 40%?
And actually, the state has valued EP Newington at even less. They're
Yeah, they shot us up.
173 million.
173 is what the state said.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, because, you know, I don't want to beat a dead horse, I think just getting the numbers so we can actually see the real revenue coming in specifically, and then all the risks here. I guess another concern I have is, our value prop as a town, there's a lot of value propositions going on, but from a business perspective, having a tax rate under $10 is significant. And so to go over 10, particularly up to 10.50, could really negatively impact our economic growth going forward. So I think we need to be very careful of that, and, you know, so I'm just gonna get that out there.
Was there any effort made by the selectmen or anybody else to find 61 cents other places?
Oh, this 1045 that you're looking at, 1050, is rough estimate. This is not cast in stone at this point. This was the best I could pull together.
I respect that, Karen, but I think at this time, this is when the tax rate for the following year is set, right?
In like
End of
3 or 4
October.
weeks.
Yeah.
I mean, and
So
we're a
this
budget
has
committee,
gotta be
so we're
pretty close.
like the numbers, right?
Exactly.
We're very specific, and it needs to be.
We don't have, we're still waiting on our utility appraiser to give us the values for 21 for the 4 other big taxpayers. Once we have those numbers in, they'll get submitted into the Department of Revenue, and then they'll start our tax rate process.
So what are the big 4 expected tax assessments based upon last year that you have in here, that you factored in the 1050?
They're based on last year. I didn't make any change. I'm not gonna guess
No, that's
what those are
fine.
gonna come in
Do
at.
you
We're-
expect them to increase or decline?
Decline,
You expect them to decline?
yeah. The gas ones anyway, because it's a gas value that's nationwide.
So third week of October, this could be 1060, not 1050.
We hope
Because this is
not.
based upon
Right.
last year without decline.
Exactly. And this is based on last year's budget numbers as well. I didn't plug in the 21 budget numbers because I didn't have them at my fingertips, and I really kind of wanted to show the budget committee apples to apples.
So the tax rate, when you say 1050, it is based, and I know it's an estimate, it's based on what our current budget is.
Last year's budget. because I wanted to show last year's
Okay,
tax rate.
so we're in 2021 budget now, so you base this on the 2020 budget?
Yes,
Okay.
because I wanted to be able to show you clearly the impact onto the tax rate, just the value of the town.
Okay, yeah. I mean, this is not good news, as everybody's figured out. This is the Delta variant, financially. Our tax rate, when we lose these legal battles with the power companies, our tax rate goes down. Actually, the total tax basis goes down, and if Marcus told me, it could very well dip below $1 billion.
Right, it's estimated right now, without getting the new, the utilities, 945 million, down from 1,024,000,000.
From $1 billion 24. That's the lost valuation from the power plant.
Right, and it shifts this breakdown.
Mhm.
Right, the utilities were paying 88%, they're gonna be down to like 83%.
Mhm.
It's gonna shift it more onto the residential property.
What would help us, because again, talking about the difficult reality, we have, every year, there's a certain inflation, there's cost of living, we have a fire contract that's under negotiation, and that would be, take effect in this coming fiscal year?
It will be proposed at town meeting, we expect.
Okay, yeah, so that's something the town votes on. But that all affects the tax rate, the tax rate's already set before the town votes. It'd almost be nice if they set the tax rate the week after the town voted. They
Yeah.
don't. The
We
tax
usually
rate is
set
set
it
in
in
advance.
arrears.
Yeah.
The tax rate we're gonna get will be for everything that happened in '21. It's set in arrears.
So
Everything that happened in 21.
Yep.
Oh, the money, we're setting the tax rate, people are paying it in 22,
You're paying the first bill in '21,
by the end of the year.
and then the first bill in '22 is an estimated rate.
Yeah.
But yeah, New Hampshire bills taxes in arrears.
Okay, so the bill that comes out in 2022, in what, June?
Yes.
That could be a different tax rate.
No, it's based on the '21 rate as an estimate. So that's why your first half bill and second half are never the same amount. If the tax bill goes down, your December bill is smaller. If it goes up, your December bill is higher.
I like to think I can manage this stuff, but it's a little tricky. Okay, so in December, there's a tax rate of whatever it is, 9 something.
Yep.
And then when does the 1050, when do we start paying the 1050 bill?
No, December bill.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're paying 1050 in November, and then in June, we're gonna pay 1050 again.
The 1050, right.
1050 rate, yes.
Yeah, so what the selectmen and ultimately we, as we advise the town, have to do is figure out if we can live with the 1050 tax rate, how much money can we afford to spend in next year's budget to live with the 1050 tax rate? And all we've got for backup is whatever in the unassigned balance.
But here's the good news, with all the big
Oh, good.
gray doomy numbers.
Yeah.
$78 million, $78,965,000 in valuation
Mhm.
roughly equates to $86,000 in town revenue. 1% at $9 per, right? So if the doom and gloom of losing almost $79 million in valuation equates to less than $100,000 on an $8 million budget, we ought to be able to figure it out, right? Especially when there's people like the school that we just heard that kick back $250,000. Especially when, I think, how low did the fire department come back last year, EJ, 140K?
We turned in, yeah.
You guys gonna do the same this year, I suppose? Oh, okay.
Well, we're running out.
Amazon. But right, but, I mean, for us to find $86,000 and to offset the decline in their valuation, it's.
Maybe I lost the decimal point. The power company could drop by another 100 million in valuation, right?
Well, that is part of the 1050.
I know, we've already cranked it in,
Right, right.
but in terms of revenue, their appraisal is gonna drop 100 million, and that's $1 million in revenue. Not 100,000.
That's correct.
So essentially, we've got to absorb $1 million in lost revenue somehow. Some of it's gonna be from raising taxes, some of it's gonna be from pulling from the reserve fund that we've been building up, and some of it may be from frugal budgeting. Those are the only three things we can do.
Or that there's other positive effects to the town, like new buildings,
Yeah.
new tax revenues.
And you guys in industrial development are working on that, I know,
I
but,
get that.
nothing, and they could say, we have two good prospects down the road, but it's not $100 million worth. But, eventually, I think we'll get back over, we'll get ourselves back over $1 billion, and we can, our tax rate will settle out from the.
I guess, the point I'd like to make is those three levers that you mentioned, I think have to be in sync and used very judiciously. Right, and that we shouldn't be in a situation where we're building up huge cash reserves so that we're burdening residents and businesses. Right, I think this, I agree, Ted, your point about having a safe amount, but I don't think we should be in a position where we are, have a huge nest egg.
The plan is not, as what you're saying, to keep a balance. And this year we'll have to build a balance up because of the abatements that we anticipate. And then hopefully after this levels off, we can go back to our normal revenues and encumbrances.
Martha, why don't you tell them how many applications for abatements we had this year? That might scare them a little bit.
We don't need to be scared, we're okay, we can handle it.
Sorry. If I could, so I love the idea that this is gonna go back to some sort of level of normalcy that you just mentioned.
We're hoping, our
But-
crystal ball is like yours.
Right, but I just didn't know if so we've had a few years of this sort of situation, so do we have a calculation of what gets us to that $2 million unassigned fund balance? Like, have we studied, looked back on these few years and said, yes, this is the amount that we need? Or is it just kind of an arbitrary number that we're coming up with because that's what's been done in years past? That would be my question.
I wish Jack O'Reilly was here to speak to that question, because years ago, when he was a selectman, the selectmen took the fund balance down to a low point and had to borrow money. And we could certainly do that. That may be something that the selectmen will discuss. Maybe for the next couple of years, to keep the tax rate low, we have to borrow. So,
Just to know if there was any recent, information that we could look at that would show, okay, this is what, especially if this has been going on since 2019, I mean, this is a few years of this now, so I just didn't know if there was any sort of, formula.
we dipped low in roughly 2014 or 15, and the finance director at the time, Anita, told us we really need to keep it at the 2 million in order not to have to borrow funds, and we've done that ever since, and we've been successful at it.
Okay, I was just curious.
I think we have to be very careful about, we want to balance our income and our our revenues and our expenditures so that we have a sustainable situation, a steady state as much as possible. I don't want to be monkeying around with borrowing here and doing this there to try to keep the tax rate at a certain number. I think the tax rate needs to be what the tax rate needs to be. We'd love it emotionally to be 10 or under for emotional reasons, but I think it needs to be whatever produces the appropriate steady state situation for the town. Not to have too much in this shock absorber or so much in that borrowed amount of money. Borrowed money is more expensive. We want to try to use our education and observations to steady state. That's what we need. Plan ahead, budget for the short term, plan for the long term, and find that steady state as much as possible.
Right, but is $2 million the right number? To go back to Emily's point, have we actually charted this and said, we dropped to 500,000 at this point, we dropped to 200,000 at this point. We need to maintain $2 million to prevent that. And if we have that, we need to see that.
Gladly.
That's,
Exactly.
it'd
It's a
be,
financial
it'd be
analysis.
nice to see,
Yeah.
right? Because money out, money in, we need to see how that goes. It's, you know,
We
is
have a
the sweet
complete-
spot 2 million? Is it 1.6 million? I heard 1.2 million is what the state recommends. Obviously, we need to understand what that sweet spot is, where we need to be so that we don't borrow money. To Jamie's point, borrowed money is expensive. But I would like, personally, I think it would be great for the entire committee to see that.
Thank you. In terms of the borrowing money, I sort of cringe at the thought of that. You know, it's like, oh, you don't want to borrow money, but I think we need to do a financial analysis to determine that it actually may make sense to borrow money for that. So, you know, we all go like, ooh, we don't want to borrow money. But from a purely financial perspective, it may benefit if your tax rate is lower, so you can benefit residents and business, and there is a risk of having to raise the tax. You know, it's a risk analysis that should be done for this.
Karen, can I ask you to say one more time? You said that, like, EP New England doesn't pay the tax rate, they pay less than schools. So what's the actual dollars per thousand they pay?
2.2 million was their tax bill last year.
Right, it was like, the rate was like
$7.02.
989 minus $1.87, so.
yeah, 702.
Yeah.
So really, the 100 million represents 702,000 dollars in revenue, not a million. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's more realistic. I had forgotten about the education thing. That happened a few years ago. The state just said, well, towns don't get a free ride in their education.
Yeah. So that seems like that's the magic number we have to find. Either
Yeah.
we have in surplus, we've made up a new revenue, or we have to cut.
Yep, that's it. Those are the three tools we have.
Just have one quick question.
Sure, go ahead.
Looking at the expenditure side, so this report was printed on the 22nd of September, so these are all, that's what we had on that date, or is that, okay. And I guess my question then to that point would be, I mean, there are some lines that still have a significant balance remaining in them. So are we anticipating, I guess this would be a question for all the departments, because I did see a few lines kind of within each department that seem to have some money left in them, so I'm just curious if those are going to be spent in the
I
next.
don't want to railroad you, Emily, but maybe it's just good to go through account by account.
Sure.
Because
Sure.
I think, I went through it that way.
Yeah, I did too. And the only departments that are actually over, or are projected to be over, is executive, election, legal, insurance, emergency management, and rec. Everyone else is projected to come in under.
So I was asking the opposite, I was asking what we may actually be able to see.
Yep.
Yeah. So I don't know the best way to go about it, but.
Well, you could ask the monitor and the selectmen to give an estimated surplus at the end of this year.
And I would certainly work with the board on that number.
In the federal government, they just spend it.
According to EP New England, that's what we need to avoid. Is it appropriate to go back to number 2 and go through town expenditure and revenues, and maybe by sheet by sheet?
You could, I'd like to go quick, and that may be more detail than you need. Why don't we go through it, and if you see something that stands out, bring it up.
I think it's important.
You're talking about town revenues?
No, I'm talking about the expenditures.
Expenditures,
And Chairman, I think it's important because I think this is a really great snapshot of how the year's going. And I think a lot of times what happens when we get back together at the end of the year and we're projecting for next year and we look at what was spent, is we lose sight of the fact that some of these accounts were at 0 or still had 100% remaining during the course of the year. And what doesn't get to come out of the different departments is what happened. How did we end up spending our money? And do we need to put that in the budget for next year? And I think a lot of times what happens with people running budgets in different departments, and it's understandable, is money gets moved from different places. I got hire over here, so I gotta move this one over here. but it appears on our sheet in December as, oh, spent their line, no problem, no increase, no increase. So actually, I think what a really good exercise would be Martha, you know, typically on our budget sheets at the end of the year, it lists 3 years, right, of the actuals. I think we should replace one of those in the sense of having the same size and same font on our charts with where our revenues were at this point of the year. So do our mid-year, our three-quarter year, two-thirds year check-in, and then see how we ended up on that. Because I see
Do you mean revenues or
expenditures.
Expenditures.
Yeah. You know, obviously, at least, maybe not line item by line item, John, but I think it's a good idea to go through department by department. Because there's a lot that's in there. I mean, I can open the sheet to anywhere. This one is the finance and assessing I happen to land on. So you got assessing services. Currently your budget is $94,000.
Page?
This page is 3.
Thank you.
So largest line item there, line item number 312, assessing services, we have $94,530 budgeted, we've spent $30,000. Do you expect to spend 68% of the budget before the end of the year?
We may get close. We've still got some large assessing bills that are outstanding. Our utility appraisal bill has not come in and hit that line 312 yet.
Okay, how much is that, Martha? Do you know, I mean,
It'll be roughly $38,000.
gotcha. So if we have 30K left over, my point is that at the end of the year, when we see that line got maxed out, we should have some information on, hey, yeah, we ended up spending $64,000 otherwise on these bills, and that's why it got to 100. Or we actually had to move some of that out to carry another line that we overspent. We should be able to say, well, how come? And then furthermore, for fiscal year 2022, we should be able to say, do you need that 94,000, or can that become the 68,000 that you actually spent for that line item the year before? And I think in every department it's the same thing. I mean, there's all kinds of different things.
The thing is, it's this early, it's hard to get a good read because the bills tend to run late. And some people, you know, like salt or whatever you're buying, it's not the same every month. But certainly by the end of the year, I think that's exactly what we should be doing.
I agree, and I understand that. And I think if Martha says in December, hey, we got this big utility assessing expense that came in, let's move on. I mean, that sounds like our budget's, that what they're asking for, that budget line item is correct. Right, nothing to see there. I think there's probably some other ones that are not. Right.
So if I can just piggyback on
Sure,
what
go
you're
ahead.
saying, I agree. I think that, you know, looking through this, as you said, I mean, pretty much every page there was sort of something that stood out as, okay, well, are we gonna be spending this, or are we not spending this? Is this budgeted correctly? Because this seems like we have a large amount of money still left in this line item. Is this gonna really be spent before the end of the year? So to piggyback on what Brandon's saying, I think that seeing where we're at 3/4 through the year with a certain line item, you know, making sure that instead of just getting it at the end of the year and saying, oh, yep, they spent the rest of that line item out, it's a good idea to look and see kind of where we were at 3/4 of the way through the year to make
Excuse
sure
me,
that.
can I just
Yeah.
clarify?
Yeah.
Can I just make sure we can provide what you're asking for?
Sure.
Are you asking for expenditures to date and a projection of what we expect remaining to get us to the end of the year?
No.
Per the expense line?
I don't know if you're talking the same thing I am, but really just for the December reports, the end of the year reports, to say, this is where the budget was, this is where the expenditures were at 9/22.
So backwards, end of the year,
Correct.
and then tie back to the third quarter.
And then maybe
Yes.
1 year back further from that too.
It's kind of a stopgap between, it's way too granular to go through expenses in each line item. It's way too granular, right? We'll never get out of this place, and like Rick knows, I see Dennis over there.
Well, we can work to midnight.
Yeah, I know you guys can, I don't.
So you're saying the end, where we ended at the end of the year, where we were in September,
Yes.
and where we
Take the
were,
same
and
data.
then where we were in September 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just the
yeah.
end of 2020.
End of 2020, 9/22, 21, so just take this exact column, paste it into that chart, and then where we are at the end of the fiscal for 21. And I think that gives us a good barometer on, hey, can I ask you a question about line item 341 under that budget? Instead of saying, can we go through the expenditures of every single account in every single department? I think that would help us to probably move quickly, but we can also get down to, hey, your telephone line item, you had only spent 20% of it as of September. How'd you spend 100% of it? Did the telephone bill go up? Did we not pay it for 6 months? Did we borrow money out of that one to pay for something else?
You'll correct me, but if you do have to move money from one account to another, that shows up in the report. And we would see at the end of the year that some of the accounts were overspent and some of the accounts were underspent.
Right.
I think that's very hard to see. Like, it'd be wonderful if we get to a point where, let's say, I don't know, so much was budgeted for electric bill, but, some of that money was moved to water bill instead. At the end of when we're looking at it, how do we know when we're making the next year's budget that we should take the electric bill and reduce it and increase the water bill?
Well, that should be.
Is that obvious?
You're gonna have the chief of police here to tell you, this is what we spent on electric, this is what we spent on water, and we're gonna be able to make sure the electric line item is reflective of what should be in the police department's electric.
Because next year you wanna have an accurate, you wanna learn from what you did last year and make it more accurate, and after doing it 2 or 3 years, it should be dead nuts right on.
So,
Yeah.
Martha, are the selectmen still keeping track of who moves money?
Who moves money? Yes,
Can we get a list of that?
absolutely.
When money's moved, the selectmen have to give permission to move it,
Sure.
not in their budget, but anybody else's budget. And that's kept track of, because they have to go on.
Because then when you do the budget for next year, you're gonna learn from that, and you'll improve the following year's budget, and then over time, the budget should
to
be.
your point,
Much
should,
better.
that column should be able to go away after 3 years, right?
That's the idea, but it doesn't, it never does, we seem to be moving a lot of money.
So Chairman, here's my point, right? If we look at each department, and I'll bring up a couple of them, because I do want to go department by department, because I think it's worth the time tonight. Let's start with executive office. The first line that sticks out is 310, you have engineering services, with $20,000 budgeted, and you spent $3,300. So, I believe, because I know my memory, and mine anybody else on the board, when we come to December and we see that line item's been fully expended at 20,000, we're not gonna blink an eye, we're gonna go, is that enough for next year? That's what we're gonna say, right? And everybody's gonna say, yeah, well, we got a couple projects coming up, so we might want to bump to 25. But we never get down to the brass of, where'd the 20 go? Did we complete all the projects that we originally budgeted that for? So my point is that at least we can say, engineering services, executive office, do you have any anticipated projects coming up? Just expend more in the fourth quarter than you did the rest of the year. So Martha, do you know anything about that line item specifically?
I don't expect that we'll be using it all and we'll need it. This will be one of the requests for the selectmen. The wages line will hopefully help, will overexpend, and the engineering line will make up for it,
Okay.
to your
In
point.
terms of running the department, you're probably 100% right. However, in terms of my point, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Right.
But it will show in the final figures that the engineering category was underspent.
Exactly.
The wage category was overspent.
Right.
Which is fine, it's just, going back to your point, we try to get the numbers right, so we don't wanna just throw money in so you have lots of money pots. I know you need some flexibility, and you have it. But if we have that data in the end, and we get a better idea of what you've been averaging for engineering and any other specific expense, maybe we can make a little better job at coming up with a number for that. And if you know, for some reason you overspent labor, then maybe we need to talk about that too. I mean, obviously you might need more money on that. Or there was a reason for it, but if we can avoid it.
This really gets steam when you start talking about tax increases on the general public, okay? Because every little thing becomes substantial, right? And I actually, I was really proud of the job the board did last year, and I think we made a couple of tough decisions in a couple of places, and I think the town was a little bit better for it. And when I look back at the end of our session, when we had the general session, and I believe it was about $180,000 that we found that all of the departments ended up saying, you know what, that's okay, we can do without that. And we found $180,000 of revenue, which is a third of what we're thinking of losing here in a $100 million abatement of a power plant. So it's important stuff.
And if you look at sort of where they're projected to be, as I mentioned earlier, the expenses, a lot of the departments are coming in under. So it appears that that budget that may have felt a little tight going in to it last year for people is potentially not going to be tight at all. And there may be additional cuts that we need to do.
Okay, any other questions on some of those?
Yes, sir, thank you. Even things like office supplies, executive office, you have $10,000 budgeted. I don't know what we've spent in the history of that line item, and then again, I don't understand how effective that history percentage is, but you get 66% of that line item left. Are you planning on making a bulk buy here?
We do at the end of the year with actually developing the budget books and getting all of our supplies for town meeting. That line will be somewhat used up. Also, I expect part of it will go again to offset the wages. And just for the record, regarding wages, part of the wage increase is because of Paul DeShane and the work that he's been doing on donor towns, as well as the cybersecurity analysis. Those are large ticket items for the town. And of course, when we moved to a new finance director, we had some overlap in time. So.
Okay. So those aren't, like Paul DeShane is not like a consultant line item, he just falls in a general rate.
Part-time employee of the town, right?
Actually W-2, part-time employee of the town.
Right. Yeah,
To
not
deal
a
with that.
contractor.
Okay.
I think maybe for when we get into this this budget for when we have the review in December or January, whatever it's going to be, I think I'd sort of like to understand what the staffing plan is. You know, what the current staff, who they are, or what they do, full-time, part-time, and sort of understand that, because there's a lot of people, and I'm trying to keep track of who's doing what. And sometimes when you have a lot of people going in and out, there can be inefficiencies, unintentionally, but there can be inefficiencies. So I kind of like to understand that a little bit better.
Okay, anything else on the line items of this current town budget?
You have a couple different departments in the same building that have redundant line items, and I'm curious if there's any potential to put them together and kind of forecast those out. Your software and computers line item. Let's see if I can. Computer expenses is 442 under executive office, which is 22,000. Under tax collector, it's 8795. Which sounds like a lot to spend on software and computers for one building. It looks like we got a bit of money left in those. Actually, not really. So maybe that's accurate, but maybe that's something to think about.
Anyone else?
One of our largest group across all of our departments' expenses is probably people. And people are very important. It wasn't more without the people the great people that we have here, things just don't happen. In terms of compensating the people that work here, what are the trends in terms of compensations? Are we in line with others? Are we lower? You know, I'm not asking that to get the answer today, but I'd just like to have a good understanding is, you know, are we on average where we should be in terms of compensation and benefits over time? We want to be in the right place to attract good people. We also want to be fair to the taxpayers in terms of how much it costs to have those fantastic people. So we want to be in the sweet spot, in the right place. So I don't know how to come up with a discussion about that, but certainly that seems to be some of the highest line items on a lot of these budgets. And we want to be fair and appropriate in all directions.
So you're right, has been a wage and salary survey, it's all online now, so it's not as easy to use, to me at least, when it was a hand thing, but it's always good to have a few comparisons, and Newington's tricky to match up, because, we don't compare with towns of 800 people, and we don't compare with Portsmouth and Dover either, we look for the Hamptons and the Exeters and something that might have comparable size offices. Especially it's important when, our chief is here now, when we're negotiating a fire contract, which the town will vote on. They should have some information. I'm sure you would provide it about what the competing salaries are in the town. Just exactly to your
We
point.
want to be fair and appropriate, we want to attract and keep good people. We also want to, be fair to the taxpayers at the same time, so, there's got to be that balance.
Yeah.
And working for the town versus working at a corporation in town, instead, we want to be in the right place where, in terms of retirements and
Yeah.
benefits.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Emily?
Yeah, I just want to speak to Jamie's point for a second, and then just have a couple quick questions. I agree, I think, good people are very important, but it does tend to be one of our, items that we spend a lot of money on. And I think, one thing that we had talked about last year was, making sure that wage increases weren't arbitrary and were more structured in how they were approached. So I just want to reiterate that, I really feel that that's important. In all organizations, there's a way that people are, promoted and receive wage increases. That aside, I just had a couple quick, questions. One is about the cemetery. I listened to one of the meetings where one of the trustees of the trust had explained that there was I believe it was a capital reserve account that had money in it, that to the tune of like $100,000, that the money hadn't been moved to pay for, I think it was like repairs and maintenance or something like that. So I didn't know if there was what the plan was for that, but that seems like, $100,000 is $100,000 right now, so. I don't know if someone can speak to that.
Do you want me to tackle that?
Well, about, of all the lots in the cemetery, about 25% of them have money which was put in for perpetual care. And the state now really doesn't recognize individual perpetual care, but we're still bound because it's in a trust account. And we can only spend the income in a given year. We can't spend the capital. So although it says 100,000, it might only be, maybe, what's the interest this year?
2,000 or 3,000 a year, depending on how it's
Yeah,
invested.
yeah.
And that's trust money, the school has some trust funds, the library
So
has trust funds.
it would be possible to have a warrant article voted on at the town meeting. And Jen Mosty, who's one of the trustees, is looking at what the steps we have to do that.
To get the money out of that account, is that what you're saying?
So what you have to do is Cypress, you have to turn it into money you can use. That's a court issue.
Right.
They can't touch the principal, they can only spend the interest. So if they don't touch the interest, it goes into principal.
And is that perpetual care tied to specific plots?
Yes.
Correct.
Gotcha, so never a total of
So-
100,000.
So back in 2004, they stopped doing that. I think Kowalski and Rhines were the last ones who but Welsham,
I mean, that people are no longer creating those.
right.
But the other ones are sort of grandfathered in.
Sometimes it's in a bequest, after the person dies.
Yeah, okay. It's not, you know, if we didn't have these trust funds chipping in their interest every year, the town is still legally obligated to maintain cemeteries, that's under state law. So it's sort of double funding in a way. So every bit, what we should do is make sure that the cemetery is using that income, and I think you are, you know, to add to the maintenance costs, and the town only has to make up the difference.
But we have to budget it.
Yeah, you got budget, right, yeah, because it's income, just like the library is the same thing, they got a budget there. Trust fund income.
One thing that did come up last year, Chairman, that was a little bit awkward and concerning at the time, and I was curious to know from the selectmen or the executive office anyways, what the mode is going forward. Are there, for town employees that are under wage line items within those departments, are there annual review processes? Are there income request processes that are in place from the executive office? Anything that kind of, I mean, we had one employee show up at the budget meeting and ask for a double-digit raise that was not even justified by the Board of Selectmen or by a superior or a management or anything like that. In the future, when somebody does that, or somebody feels like, you know, like they could do, is there any kind of review process annually that town employees go through where they are reviewed for their performance?
So certainly, town employees that are appointed definitely go through an evaluation process. However, elected officials do not currently. That isn't to say that the selectmen couldn't meet with the, I believe you're talking about the town clerk tax collector raise. Couldn't meet with the town clerk tax collector and go over things, but there isn't a review process for the elected officials. I believe the polls, people usually say, the polls are their review process, you know.
If you keep your job, right. So are you saying then, Martha, at any point, any town employee who is unelected could request a wage increase of 50%, and they would be subject to the budget committee?
Are you talking about now elected or unelected?
Unelected.
Unelected, these are people, these are employees that are hired. They should not be in a position to be asking for individual pay raises. They should ask their supervisor for a pay raise, and it's presented either the, you know, the fire chief, or the police chief, or the selectman, or whomever. Would say, you know, I think we need to give, you know, fire department's union, police department, you know, chief says, this is what we think we need to do this year.
Yeah. So what if they are elected?
We, the voter, makes that decision.
On whether they keep their job?
Yeah.
But that information isn't given at the poll, right? It would be given in the public hearing for budget, but this is how much an elected official is making in their yearly.
Yeah.
But I guess my point is that there's no review process.
No, I mean,
internally.
it's almost like, you know, our elected politicians in Washington. I mean, the salary is set, and that salary is set by town meeting. And anybody can run for that office and get elected to it. But the salary is preset before they run. It's not, you know, it's not a negotiable thing. But, you know, it's up to the town, it's up to us to say, okay, this is what the salary is. You know, it's in the budget, we're voting this much for these elected positions. Selectmen the same way. I mean, they don't get a lot of money, but we vote what their stipends is.
Right. Yeah, I guess I was feeling bad about that one last year, because it seemed to me it got personal at a public hearing for the employee to.
Yeah, I think that was unfortunate. I think.
What's to stop that though? Like what's better policy internally in the town to stop that from happening?
Well,
It's just the
probably falls on us. You need a sort of a subcommittee to review elected salaries. You know, we could do that.
Okay.
As I say, at one one time the selectman's salary became a political hot potato, years and years ago, because they wouldn't raise it, and then suddenly they wanted to raise it a big chunk. So now I think we try to, most of these elected positions, we try to keep along with the cost of living with a lot of the other employees, so we don't have this issue of having to vote it. But in the case of the town clerk, apparently we didn't. Well, the workload went up a lot.
Yeah, understood.
Ideally, that could have been done in a subcommittee, or even the selectmen could have weighed in because they have the knowledge of it.
Thank you.
It didn't.
Appreciate the information, we got it down.
Martha, I don't know if this is something you would have, looking at repairs and maintenance for most town buildings, most budgets are underspent by 42 to upwards of 94%.
What page you on?
Any of them. If I look at, town garage repair and maintenance is 92% still to go. So we've spent $1,000 on a $13,000 budget. Do we anticipate high maintenance and repair costs in the last quarter of the year?
There are a large number of generator repairs going on in various buildings, but,
It's just in general across all town buildings, most of them are significantly underspent.
Isn't a major generator repair covered under a warrant article? Isn't there a capital reserve fund?
There could be.
actually,
There already
Yes,
is, we
discussed.
put money in every year.
right, this year, the police station, for example, will have a $7,900 transfer switch repair to their generator. That'll come out of the police station line.
And that's different than what we heard about last year with the fence and everything else that we were doing.
Easy with the fence.
Hey, you're the fence guy.
Like, I dropped the fence.
You did, you got rid of the fence. But didn't we handle that, or is this different? The transfer switch different from
Well,
the?
remember the issue was, I think we were looking at putting money into an account or warrant article with an account for new generators. And come to find out what the issue with the police department was the switch, the
Okay,
connector switch. So I think opposed to a $20,000 generator, we're looking at $7,000 to make the connection actually happen when the power goes out, so.
Yeah, I'm just curious, if we're 3/4 of the way through the year, and many budgets are, some not spent at all.
so question,
Want to see expenditures there?
I'm with you. One of my major notes for tonight was, we have a lot, town garage, old town hall, meeting house. Presumably, depending upon what we spend in the last quarter of the year, there's $25,000 in there in building maintenance that may not get spent. It's just kind of an open item. And if there's not projects that need to be completed in the cold weather, potentially, maybe we gotta look at funding a reserve item for town building maintenance that either gets spent or doesn't, but at least it's earmarked for that money, and we don't have to keep funding it every year.
If I can speak to Old Town Hall, there is a bid, we've received bids and are awarding within the next 2 weeks, painting, which will be roughly $11,000 out of the Old Town Hall budget. For those of you that have seen it, it's desperately needed.
When was the last time it was done, do you know?
I couldn't tell you, it'll be different times for different rooms and the exterior,
So that's 11,000 in interior paint or exterior paint?
both,
$11,000 a whole building.
many portions.
Okay.
So do we have all of the buildings that we maintain listed here? I don't see
They-
it. They all have?
They're all in here, yeah.
Historically, the maintenance accounts tend to be spent heavily in the end. One, it's human nature, people are getting things going ahead, oh, we gotta do a contract, we gotta get somebody to look at this building. Takes a while to do the groundwork. There's another thing that, well, let's not commit everything in case one of the projects is, really needs work, and we've gotta borrow from different accounts. So oftentimes, they don't get spent, but they're not even expensive then, because at least the contract is set, and they're encumbered.
Yes.
By year end, so this, a mid-year shot isn't accurate necessarily, but it's worth pursuing in the end.
it's not necessarily done, it's worth being skeptical about, it's just worth asking, right? So like, maintenance and repairs, you get 25,000 in the fire station, you get 9,300 of expense, was there a big item coming to you?
So we had generator work done as well, I believe that was $2,700
Right.
for the generator. They had to fix some repairs and some stuff that wasn't taken care of when we first got it. And then we're currently working on looking at some evaluations of the building itself, so there'll be some funds taken out of that. So,
From maintenance and repairs?
yes, I believe so. Yeah.
Okay, same thing at police station, roughly 40% of your budget left, do you have any big things coming up at the end of the year, chief?
I know we have some mold abatement issues. I know one was addressed this year. I don't think that's on the forefront for this year as well, but
The Sallyport ceiling needed to be painted, and the old transfer switch, that's $7,900 out of that budget.
Those have already been paid, or those are pending invoice?
So, I'm just curious, the generators, it sounds like we didn't need a new generator for the police station. So that came, the fix came out of this budget. And then it sounds like, what happened with the fire station, similar?
Same thing.
Same thing? Okay. So then theoretically, there should be money left over from the generator out of them.
Right, we have not touched the generator replacement capital reserve.
That's only for replacement, it's not for repair. How's it worded?
I can't tell you on the top of my
I
head.
believe it's major repair replacement, I think it's called major repair and replacement.
Oh, what makes it major?
Over 10, or when they decide to major repair.
It's not, I mean, obviously, it's not small repair, because, you know, once it's in the capital reserve, we don't have any control of it. I'd rather have as much control within the annual budget. Just so you guys can review this stuff.
That's a
Ask
good,
those questions.
that's a good point.
Anything else that strikes us now? I think it's, you're going to, we talked about a good year-end analysis, so we can actually see.
Any long-term plans for the Stone School, your favorite? Are there any long-term plans for the Stone School?
Okay. You know, Dennis is here, and he will tell you that the planning board is doing a long-range, what do you call it, strategic planning document?
CIP, capital improvements plan.
A capital improvement plan. So they are doing a capital improvement plan, and as I told Dennis when I was at the meeting, this is not a wish list that people could say, oh, it's on the plan. It's worst-case scenario. You know, what might the town need or want that we need to be planning on? Like, if we anticipated 100 extra pupils come in, then, you know, a school addition would be on the capital improvement plan. So anyway, so keep us abreast of that, because it's obviously important to us. That's why, you know, you invited me to your meeting, we were setting this up. But they're doing a capital improvement plan, but doesn't mean it gets funded. You know, we make that decision.
Does anybody have the opinion to sell the land and get rid of it?
What's that?
Does anybody have the opinion to sell the land and get rid of it, or we can't because it's still part of the Air Force
Part
agreement?
of the agreement, the historical agreement was that, when the town signed that, it's ridiculous, it hamstrings us, everything. We've had the Air Force down here, we've talked to historical people within the last 2 years, I think it was, Marvin. And the stuff we'd have to do to that would cost us billions, not millions, billions, I think, to bring it back. It's really, really stringent and tough. And it's something I don't think we want to undertake, personally.
To get rid of it or fix it?
Well, to fix it, it's,
No, I agree with you, I think we should get rid of it. Stop working on
well,
it.
you know, maybe we ought to give it back to the Air Force.
There you go.
Amen, brother. I've been saying it for a long time.
It's condemnable. I mean, it's an insurance liability, you're gonna be able to breaks a window and walk through that place. But anyways, okay.
But John wants a school that we don't want to demolish. It's historic.
It is, along with everything else.
It was the Air Force who put in all that asbestos.
Yeah.
And when they converted it to their own use. Before that, it was all natural, wooden stone. Believe me, it was stone.
Martha, one more question about regional associations. That's another budget line, 81% still to go. Do we see all those bills at the end of the year for these things, like Coast Bus, $34,000?
We just received the invoice for Coast Bus, that'll be paid in the next 30 days,
Okay.
$34,000.
So we see most of these come towards third, fourth quarter of the year?
Exactly.
Okay, I just wanna understand that.
Especially that department, that regional association.
Any other particular line items, we've got some other things to.
Yeah, police department.
Oh, police, of course.
Police department, line item 113, which is your holiday pay, it's 50% on the fire department, and 0% on yours.
Yeah, that's because that's, the holidays pay is paid out in, the end of November.
For the entire year.
Yes. It's done each year like that.
Gotcha, that makes sense then, thank you.
Anything to
Overtime.
help.
Overtime line item 140.
Yeah, so overtime line, obviously, we're gonna have some issues with that due to being down an officer. That way, if you're looking at the overtime and part-time wages, we're down an officer this year and to fill the demands of the town, we're hitting those line items right there, so. Right now, we've adjusted schedules where, myself and other officers are working different shifts, including my detective's gonna be working time, just so the over expenditure of that line's not so much, but we knew that, we didn't anticipate that. We had our early retirement this year that we didn't anticipate, so.
So, by ARPA, we'll see a corresponding reduction in the actual wages line, or salaries line because of that.
Yes.
So it's, actually, paying the overtime is sometimes cheaper than funding the position.
But the overtime, that's just not covering the vacant shift, that's also covering people going on vacation and stuff like that, right?
Of course, yeah, no, you're gonna have that line item anyways, but if you have extra overtime because you lost a guy, you should have low salaries and then high overtime, right, to cover?
Yep. It's
Okay.
gonna show up in Marshall, your new spreadsheet.
Accreditation 293, is this the last year that you're paying, that you're putting that in the budget?
No, accreditation is a annual thing that goes on. So what I do wanna say is, thank you everybody who participated, I wanted to start off with that. And I know Brandon, you definitely did have some questions regarding accreditation with the assessor when you talked to him, but, no, that's gonna be an ongoing thing. Not necessarily that amount. Well,
5,000, you have it in, that's 293.
Yeah. Not saying that that's gonna be the same amount each year, like right now, I think we have a $1,300 credit or $2,000 credit that we're gonna be able to roll into next year. So, that's gonna fluctuate each year.
Okay, thank you.
But thank you for everybody for supporting that, I really do appreciate it.
Details.
You may notice that many people here realize that the police department is very active in the pursuing of the police officer who was killed on a bicycle a week ago. And Newington was credited by the state police and the Attorney General's office for their input and help and bringing that subject to justice. And I tip of the hat to the department and the officers who let that out later.
How's the dog doing?
Let's get it.
He's still healthy, he's being used?
So you guys wanted the dog? I have other things that I wanna go over, but that's fine.
Skip some dog.
No, the dog's doing well.
I was just, yeah.
It's been requested 25 times since he was certified last year.
Okay, 25 times.
Yes.
But I will say so right now, in the budget, we have, I think, a little over $17,000 that was donated. This year we had $500 donation from SIG, $500 from the storage barn, $5,000 from Northeast Credit Union Love Your Community Contest, and $250 from an association, senior association from the Seacoast. So monetary donations, we have $6,250, and in-kind donation was $776.80. And the annual expenses, I think when we went through it, I said they were between $1,200 and $1,300, which they are between, it's right now at $1,313 for the dog. So we anticipate, so we're in a good position right now, because I think the dog's life expectancy for training and, well, doing the job is 7 years, and right now I think Augie's his second year.
Great.
Good. So we have a retirement party for the dog in 5 years.
I think I'll put that in the budget sometime.
Any other, did anyone else have anything particular in the budget? Do you want to discuss it?
Can I touch on a couple of things real quick?
Yeah.
One of the things that Jamie brought up is each year we do a wage study through Rockingham County Police Chiefs Association. So we do get that numbers. And right now, we're on a 10-point step scale, right? That when I came here, I fell into just as patrol officers do. And we do biannual evaluations on the officers to see where they stand. So if we're gonna hire somebody, whether they're certified or not, we can put them on a certain section of that pay scale. If they have 5 years, we'll put them on the step 5, obviously with the review from the police commission. So we have a process that we do, and we look at it, and that's how we adjust the steps. We haven't had to adjust the steps in, I think, a year, maybe a year or two right now, but we are pretty much on the average of looking where every department is. We were low before, but now we're right up to it.
So that hopefully makes it easier to fill this hole in your, if you're in line versus way low.
So another aspect, we did hire somebody, and in the process, retention is tough with police department. Not really tough nowadays, but hiring is tough. Before we put out, we'd get 20 applications and we'd have 15 come to a PT test. I had to do 2 processes, because the first process we had 6 applicants and 3 people came to the PT test. And in reviewing these, the three people that came, I think 2 passed. In reviewing their background packets, it's got to be the person that fits the town and the community, right? And especially fits the police department to work. We had to wash the candidates out there and do another process. So right now, we did hire somebody. I'm holding off because the academy's not until January, so I'm swearing him in November, because we had to have the paperwork in to the academy beforehand. So I'm kind of buying a little time before we put him on the road and start his field training process. So just to explain some things regarding the wage.
Right, well, I was just thinking, not specifically any department, but just in general, as a town, we should have a kind of an idea of where we're going, you know, the cost of our personnel, it's always gonna go up, but is it going up at a rate that makes sense to everybody around us? We wanna make sure we're fair, we wanna get good people.
Oh, we do.
You know, it's a tricky discussion always, but it should be a discussion that's not just department, but it should be a town-wide discussion. Hey, maybe a certain amount of contract, maybe increase the contract, maybe less full-time, or, you know, whatever ratio makes the most sense for the town. And maybe you're right on in the department, I have no idea, it's just hard to, but it'd be nice to look at that as a town-wide observation.
I noticed maybe this would be a good time to go on to carryover items to make sure we get those. Did you have a list of those?
Yes, those are in your packet under the town tab.
For new members, this is something that Jamie suggested a couple of years ago, and it's sort of useful because it's a memory, it's an institutional memory of things that we talked about, like stuff we just talked about today in the reports. So where, did you find it first, Margaret? Is it
It's right after the tax rate page. in your, under your time tab.
Chairman, did you,
Looks like this.
Well, anyway, let's, why don't you run over it with us, Martha? I don't have time before we start talking.
The first item is to review of the benefit plans each year.
Mm-hmm.
So those will be delivered to the committee.
Okay, good.
Next, look into combining internet and IT between departments. This
Yeah.
has been reviewed between departments, and at this time, the departments would like to remain separate.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
For security, I believe that's also been found to be a safer avenue for the town. Next is bids for wastewater treatment facility services to the Selectmen and Budget Committee. And give Budget Committee list of items that Utility Partners, which is the managing company for the sewer wastewater treatment facility, pays for sewer building, etc., and figure out how much sewer budget amounts would have to be cut to reduce the rates by 5%, 10%, 20%. And I've given these to the wastewater treatment facility for their review and action.
Okay, we have our sewer commission that's going to be working on that.
Yes, and you have a sewer commissioner among your ranks,
Is that
Rick
right?
Stern.
Yeah, that's right.
you'll have all this.
You will.
Can I ask a question about item 2? Does keeping those 2 items, or these, separate between departments would probably logistically makes a lot of sense? Is it also financially make sense too?
Right now, we believe that our departments are getting excellent service being split up, but I wouldn't want to speak for the chiefs.
Financially, it's working out?
So, as far as for us, for the fire department, I have the cheapest IT cost. So I don't have a monthly fee that I have to pay to a company essentially to have service on the other end of the phone. If I call and have an issue, I literally send my person a text.
So you got a good deal, let's not mess it up, is what you're saying.
Correct.
Same thing with the other department?
Well, I will say IT is expensive, and I'm not an IT person, so just following the advice, I know the one company we had before was nickeling and diming us, and this company is Daystar, it's right here in Newington, and they seem to be doing a great job. I mean, cybersecurity is the biggest thing for us, because we have so much personal information stored at the department. I mean, maybe someday the town will go to a full-time IT person to handle all the IT projects here and combine everything. It will cost something, but I'm happy where we are right now.
I don't think the idea is to combine it in order to make it cost more. The thought was to not have redundant, try to get rid, try to make them cost less by combining. But if combining them isn't gonna make it cost less and it's gonna make it work, less, obviously, I agree with your decision to keep doing it, especially if you have a sweetheart deal. We just gotta get you a sweetheart deal.
Well, it's cybersecurity. I mean, that's the big talk now, in protecting like right now, for instance, with Daystar, we have to go through annual training. And then they do tests with us where they'll send a blank email to see if anybody's gonna open the link and look at it. So it's constant training for us, and it's, I mean,
Necessity of business.
it is, because then it would cost, if there's a, I don't wanna say violation, but if we're hacked, you're talking millions of dollars.
Unfortunately for us versus PD, most of our secure data with patient information is all controlled at the state level, so we don't have to pay for any of that.
Yep.
So all of our HIPAA records and all that, the state actually funds that through the Bureau of EMS, where the PD has to keep it all local. So we have a sweetheart deal because it's all cloud-based and the state funds all of that security. They unfortunately don't. So the IT departments are very different because of the state funding on our side and the non on theirs.
And how about the town has a server too, is that right? My understanding is that the other large computer expense at the town itself.
Exactly. And we spend a lot of time with our IT company. Just today alone, I would say that we were on the phone for a good 2 hours handling issues with the iPad. And they're phenomenal. We really enjoy our group, their excellent service. And many other towns use Armon, the group that we have for the town hall.
We also, if I may add, we also bid that out last year. We went through a bidding process, we bid it out, and they were very reasonable considering what they were offering us, and they held what they said they'd do.
And that's a contract that's bid out every year or every couple years?
I don't like the contract, not to tell you
Every
that.
3 years.
Every 3 years.
Yeah.
How many iPads does town hall have?
I'm sorry?
How many iPads does town hall have?
2.
Okay, anything else on the list?
Yes.
Number 4.
The selectmen, did someone have a question on 4? Or, I have 6, the selectmen should work with HDC to create a system to preserve the town's historic records. Look into 7, look into alternative pest control methods. The town did review that last year, and a different kind of spray was used that was more organically friendly. Method to track temperatures in town buildings. We'll need clarification on that.
So, I think I
Is that
brought
what
that
it
up,
is?
and I think it was about, being able to, have, especially if you have an iPad or something like that, being able to, I think Jim mentioned that the building inspector periodically goes to the town buildings and makes sure to see what the temperature is or something like that. So I think, the idea, or my thought process behind that, I mean, I can see what my temperature is in my home that's 3,000 miles away. So if we had some sort of way of knowing, or so-and-so left the heat on, or, the last group that was in there, whatever, and you can, get alerts on your iPad, whatever, it just would be a more centralized thing.
We
Good
can
point,
work
particularly there's some buildings, like Old Town Hall, Parsons, people don't go in much.
in-house,
And
right?
you can buy those smart thermostats that you say you can
Right.
tap into with your iPhone.
Or your phone, you can get an alarm if it's left on, so then
Then maybe we can turn down the thermostats in those buildings, if we have a quick response alarm.
Yeah, and so to piggyback on that real quick, I know that we have telephone service at those buildings, but I know that that would require Wi-Fi to do something like that, so I'm not sure but I'm not sure if we could actually get Wi-Fi to those buildings for the same cost as, telephone service.
Money we spend in telephone.
Yeah, I mean, it could be pretty comparable to what we're paying for a telephone service to get Wi-Fi in those buildings, it might be worth looking at.
There's companies that actually specialize in this, and BAS is one of them, and you can actually control entire facilities remotely, and it doesn't require Wi-Fi. It can be done through telephone line and Cat5 cable, so there are options out there, so I think it's worthwhile to investigate that, because then you can really actually, if somebody has the heat turned on and forgets to shut it off, you can actually go in and control that building.
So that's pending.
Yes, it is, thank you. Fire department major repair for vehicles, capital reserve capped at 50,000. Police department computer capital reserve capped at 35,000. Police department radio electronics capital reserve capped at 25,000. Generator capital reserve capped at 50,000. Fire equipment capital reserve capped at 20,000. Look into installing Wi-Fi at the Old Town Hall. It is installed. Include detailed revenue report for September 2021 meeting. You have that, and I'm going to be giving you more detail. More clarity in safety lane committee minutes. They tried to have a meeting earlier this year. There was not significant attendance. There hasn't been another one. Grade levels and procedures for wage increases for town clerk. Report cost savings measures in 21 for September meeting.
Okay. Good job. We like to say we're holding feet to the fire, but you're doing a good job in it. Okay, So we covered the carryover items. I think we discussed the fund balance pretty well earlier. That brings us to other business.
John, if you don't mind, I don't want to stay here all night and belabor some of these issues, but I'd just like to get a sense of where the town is before we go into December. I just have a couple more specific questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Time wise. Any major warrant articles expected for 2022 before we get into budgets?
Major?
Yeah. Okay. One other thing that came up in the Economic Development Committee that I thought was important to bring up to the Budget Committee is there's been consideration from them as an advisory to the planning board. So just ideas that get floated around realistically of providing tax incentives, meaning reduced taxes for people who either adjust their building and improve their building or build new buildings to receive tax incentives like up to 50% of their taxes, property taxes waived for 5 years. And when you kind of boil it all down to what the essence of it is, it's to make up for the sewer commission. We've talked about this a couple times on this board concerning how, folks are, obviously the sewer only serves commercial and industrial spaces in this town, and kind of blank check, rubber stamp on their expenses over the years to improve their facility. All of that gets paid by the sewer and what they collect from the commercial and industrial segments of town. Unfortunately, what's happened is it's become such an uncompetitive sewer rate that it's been a little bit of a block for some people that may want to build here or may want to stay in town. So to kind of compensate from that, that's what we really came back to in the Economic Development Committee, was that we could find some other incentives. I don't believe in that theory that we should put our lowest price item, which is our tax rate in the area, on sale. However, there's a sewer issue in terms of the rates in town.
Yeah.
I asked Martha at that meeting, I believe, or maybe it was just after, if I emailed you, we really got to get the sewer commission thinking about this, because I think the best thing that can happen is there's a couple of high volume users in this town that are really affected, and some of which we'd really like to stay in town. It would be really nice if there was some kind of scholarship program that came out of the sewer commission, if they were able to find $30,000 or $40,000 a year in their budget in order to give back to some of these high volume users who actually promote more clean water, gray water, than they do black water. That's really good for the system. There's a couple of really good reasons why they should be able to kick that back into it. And I think the budget committee should go over that with the sewer commission when they come in to see us.
Did you say Rick's on the sewer commission?
Yes.
And you would be prepared for that.
If the one business you're talking about, we can't take a lot of their water. There's too much bacteria.
We
So
can't
they have to ship it.
I'm not talking about any one business, just in
And
general.
I don't want to go into the details, which we should be discussing when the whole sewer commission is
Correct.
here. But, all of this is revenue sensitive, so it certainly will come to us eventually.
Yeah.
Tax abatements and stuff. Okay, any,
Vote.
so we're on to other business now.
Oh.
Are you good? You have one more?
I
Okay.
skipped, I'm sorry.
That one's a little off, out of
I
left
have an
field.
affinity for it.
You're on it.
I skipped over the fire department.
I'm here for it.
Highway department, there's a backhoe warrant article, did that get purchased? Was it used or new?
Yes,
No,
They bought a new one.
brand new one.
Interesting news. Okay, very good. Resurfacing, we got a big budget for that. But I also noticed that this year they put some of that hard pack on the shoulders. Was that included in the specs, like on Fox Point Road, they included those 2-foot compact shoulders? Was that included in the bids? Is that a new town standard?
That is a typical town standard. Every time we pave a road, we put on the 2-foot shoulders, same as always. Airport Road, you name it.
What was the last one?
I may have just not noticed it before. Very good.
Yes.
Oh.
Can I jump in for a second? Can I take this out for a second? Real quick questions for EJ.
Yes.
I noticed that you had a detail expense line item.
Yes.
So is the corresponding corresponding, but then on the revenue side, you had revenue for, C3 and COVID.
So the C3 is just, that's just a carryover of verbiage that's on there. It was all from the COVID clinics that we had.
Okay, so is that detail corresponding to?
So the whole detail total was $118,400, but the money that got paid back out to the individuals and the hourly rates, the FICA, the Medi, and the retirement was $109,457. So out of that whole fundage, $8,942 went into revenue into the town coffers. Yep.
So that detail services C3 line item is police and fire?
No, just fire. Yeah, that was all just for the COVID detail down at Sears.
Was there another addition put on the fire station?
Nope.
We had a capital outlay account of $3,000 for a fire station addition.
That actually should be reflected in the fire station budget. It is, that's an error. So that $3,000 charge will be in the fire station budget.
For building maintenance or?
It was part of the final work on the addition, the last $3,000.
And then how's the pickup truck?
Still brand new somewhere.
Just haven't been able to get it yet.
So we're anticipating, probably beginning of December is the last word we have.
Last one is promised.
So, just while you're on me real quick.
Yes.
Thank you,
Just as a reminder, we did get that grant for the $15,000, so the $15,000 warrant article for the PT equipment will get turned back in. We will not touch.
And the ISO rating.
Yes,
Back to general fund?
yes.
Yep.
What's the ISO rating?
So essentially, there's, the town gets rated on, it's, the ISO is what they're called. So we essentially get scored, the fire department gets scored for the town on staffing, apparatus, equipment, response times, those trainings. There's a whole thing that goes into it. And essentially what it does is it creates a score for the town. And that score is then used as a data point for insurance companies for your homeowner's insurance or for the business insurance. There's a much bigger percentage of it that goes towards the business insurance side of it. So it's a score of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst, 1 being the best. We currently are a 5, and we will be restored to a 4. So essentially the business insurance should drop. Their rate should drop. It's minimal on a homeowner's insurance. There is still minor reductions, but it's minimal on a homeowner's as opposed to the actual businesses. So they'll see the biggest effects from
So
it.
because you're doing a better job in all
Yes.
these things,
Exactly.
you're getting charged, the businesses will get charged less insurance.
They'll get charged
Because you're
less.
really-
Yep.
You can get there quicker and.
Yep. And it's on a 5-year rotation, so every 5 years ISO will come in.
It's great.
Yep.
Congratulations.
Well, there's something that goes towards the offset of the sewer. No, really, I mean, think about that.
Well, sure, I mean,
At least get a
looking
couple
for things that
funds
we
on
can
that.
sell to business, and we have a well-rated fire department, and a well-rated police department, and a great school, I mean, all that helps.
And the one thing that's great about too is it helps us with a strategic plan to better that score even more next time, if possible, so. And I believe, is if we keep on the track we're going, we have to modify some stuff, because there's a decent amount that's not in our control. It's either Rockingham County that we use for our dispatch communications, or the city of Portsmouth for the water department for the fire hydrants, and testing of the hydrants and that type of stuff. Those were 2 of our really low scoring areas. So Rockingham's working on updating their stuff over there. We're trying to see what we can do on our side to take care of the hydrants that are in Newington. So if possible, that next time we get reevaluated, we could bump up to a 3, which would help even more. So,
Maybe for discussion later, but the whole, what we pay for water, right? I mean, it runs through our town, and I don't know when that contract was last negotiated with the city of Portsmouth, but I don't know if that's something that should be considered. I don't know if there's potential savings there, but it's my understanding that that hasn't been negotiated since the 70s or the 80s a long time ago.
But they
The
are-
original, I think it was the original agreement that was
Yeah.
set in place in the sixties.
Okay, so, I don't know if the rate is good or not, but that may be worth something to look at.
Okay, you can put it on the list. I would assume we pay the same rate, less sewer than it was.
I think we pay the rate that Portsmouth pays.
Yeah, but regardless, when you have a contract that's that old, I would think that we need to take a look at it because it may not meet our needs.
On the sewer, Rick, you guys have the bond principal payment, line item 997, you overspent by $150,000.
I haven't heard of them to do that. Don't
Okay.
quote me on that. We do get some monies back also from grants. I
Okay.
think we just received one for $150,000.
Okay, so maybe you put that towards the bond payment or something.
That's what happens too.
Gotcha.
Okay, that's the last question.
You hope so.
All right,
I do have it, yeah.
okay, all right, Emily?
Sorry, can I just ask one more question? On the revenue side, the Fox Point lease, how long of a lease do we have on that, and when is that gonna be renewed or looked at again?
It's an annual lease, and every May it's reviewed.
Martha, where does the money come to maintain that building?
The Fox Point line in the land management budget.
So it's not specific to that building?
Right, it's not specific.
What's the annual rent?
$1,550 monthly.
I'm sorry, not 50.
Yeah.
Is that reviewed every May as well, in terms of current market conditions, or? Yes,
We haven't reviewed it
Yeah.
yet.
They pay utilities?
I'm sorry?
They pay utilities?
The town pays for water
Mhm.
and the tenant pays for
Heat, electricity,
propane and.
And that also cuts the grass up there, does some maintenance for us, at less cost than if we hire it out, so there is some benefit.
Well, there are, yeah, there are benefits, plus somebody living there.
Right, and he can do some good work with the house, so it's been a good thing for the town at this
Okay,
point.
all right.
John, is there any, this is a curveball, wild one, but, where you have the power plants in town that are constantly adjusting the appraisal and asking for abatement. There's two factors in what they pay the town every year, and one's the appraisal, and the second one's the rate. Is there any kind of mechanism in the town has under control where potentially the rate has to go up? And there's an abatement, or there's a savings, or there's a sponsorship for residents that live in town, so that there's one thing that industry and different people can't bargain on, which is the rate of the taxes.
Well, the tax rate, if everybody's sort of getting the same services, the tax rate is the same. What you're saying is you raise the tax rate and then.
What if you raise the tax rate $3 million and gave the $3 million back to offset resident taxes?
Well, I don't know, we offer abatements to elderly people and maybe veterans. And veterans.
Right.
And that is set by the state, or can we control that?
Town meeting.
Town meeting control that. Okay. So what you could do, though, as far as I know, those are the only options we have probably, where we can individually abate, private property owners on that basis. So if our property tax rate goes up and we are worrying about some of our elderly people and our veterans, that we could increase that. But for some of our.
This is my point. My point is if EP Newington says, I'm gonna keep abating my appraisal down by $100 million a year, is it possible that a town can just raise the tax threshold and the rate by what we budget and then keep the money there to abate the private citizens?
Also regulated by the state, as long as it's gonna be capped.
Yeah, that's what I was just saying, that's the
Of
only,
course you do.
it's the only avenue we have.
I'm not making a motion, so I'm simply saying.
Oh, I know,
is there an
I'm
option?
gonna give you info.
The one thing they don't have any control over at EP Newington, they can contest the appraisal of the property all they want, they can't contest what the rate is,
They can't, but the rate is universal
unless voted on at town meeting,
for those categories, yes.
just for veterans and
As
elderly.
far as I know.
I think I'm right, I think, we can look into it, but I think, Chairman.
How do you know it's worth looking into? Just a crazy idea.
He's been politics on this.
He
Okay,
is.
anything else? No, I wanna move on just to some,
Question here, John.
is that, yeah,
Oh, John, I was saying, there are other things, but it takes a vote of the town, such as solar panels or
Right.
energy efficiency thing that the town wanted to do. You have to look at the specific RSAs, and the town can vote on those things, but the homeowner has to own those things to get the tax abatement. If you don't have any of those, you pay the full price.
okay, so that, we don't have any of those.
We don't have any of that.
So that's another avenue, but they would have to make an investment to get
Yes.
that.
Yes, it
It's like the federal program. All right, interesting to know. So, you know, we ought to do a warrant on that, if they want to.
There's a myriad of them out there, but you gotta know where they are and go find them.
Yeah, yeah, okay. All right, if there's anything else, I wanna go on to electing chair and vice chair and just talking about the schedule a little bit. If we could move on to that.
I just have one, yes, but I have a very, very,
Oh.
very quick. When we are presented, town budget, police, fire, all the different ones, we're definitely looking for that 1 year's budget. But it would be awesome to have some discussion during that, presentation about a plan beyond the 1 year. Here's my 3-year plan, and this is my 1 year budget as step one to get there. If just that mindset, it would be fantastic. Like going for accreditation, or, you know, those kind of, you know, what's my 2 or 3, 5-year goals
Well,
that
that's kind of what the
department's going for.
CIP
And I
is.
think a lot of that's already been happening, but I just wanna encourage that more of that.
Yeah, fill out.
Because it helps make our short-term discussions a lot shorter and easier if that's just one little piece of the bigger plan that we all agree to.
You can fill out Dennis's questionnaire very thoughtfully and carefully, and that will help, that's part of that.
Yeah, I think John Krebs has already gone out to all the different departments and asked for it, and you should, if you haven't gotten it, you should get back with us and let us know you haven't gotten it, because you should have. But we need to have that and, to get that done. That only works on capital improvements.
Yeah.
That's a guideline for the town, it's a good thing, it has to be done, so.
But Jimmy, I mean, you're right in a way, people say, you know, our population is growing and we need to anticipate an increase in the police force, an increase in the teacher staff, or fire. Yeah, that would be good to know.
Be nice to know that we're ahead or below what the trends are, that sort of stuff.
I've been doing some research for the historic tour, and I decided that New England probably has the country's most stable population. In 1790, we had like 512 people in that.
Martha, did you say that the town got back $50,000 from Eversource for road damage?
Yes.
And where's that headed to?
To pave or reconstruct roads that were affected by the Eversource.
Is it earmarked that it has to go to those roads that we claim they damaged?
It doesn't actually, but within the Rockingham Planning Commission roads survey, there were roads that were identified in your budget that we weren't able to get to because of the additional cost of pavement. So we're planning to get those still done this year. So for example, Patterson Lane was in your budget, that's being done. Little Bay was in your budget, that's being done. In addition to that, Nibble Hill Road, which I'm sure we would all agree is in very bad shape from the school to Fox Point, and the board has approved getting that done as well.
Yeah, because of we knew that the trucks were gonna tear the road up quite a bit, so we held off on doing some of the main roads until we know for sure. So when the extra money comes in from Eversource, we can put it into the $190,000 budget for the roads. That's what we're planning.
Okay. Good. Anything else on the budget? Okay, housekeeping, like to have we need a nomination for chairman and vice chairman.
I move to nominate John Lamson for chairman for his 112th term.
Okay, any other nominations? Then we'll vote on Lamson. All in favor?
Aye.
Abstain. Vice chair, we have nomination for vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Brandon.
All right, Brandon, a second? Okay, any other nominations for vice chair? Okay, if not, all in favor of Brandon as vice chair? Right, good. The other thing is, I think we have at least the first 2 Wednesdays in December, possibly the third.
First two is what's in your draft calendar, if you like it. But certainly if you want to go 3 Wednesdays in December, you can make it work.
Now we're going up to about the 15th to 16th, now you're okay. Okay, we're good, we can manage the rest of January.
Is that always the first Wednesday of the month, or does that include the first Wednesday of the
I'm
month?
sorry,
Is the first Wednesday of the month included in the days? The first Wednesday? The first
Right.
week?
Yes, so the 1st and the 8th.
right.
So you guys can have a long business vacation, and then we'll make up for it in January. We usually we can make this work. But if the first time, it looks like we got a lot of work, maybe we'll have to schedule it for early December. Normally we will, okay, good. So there's that. Any other business? Yes.
Need to approve the minutes.
Good point. We have a minute, they have good minutes. That's what we did there. Martha, thank you. I'm glad you mentioned that. Motion, motion? Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Great. All in favor of approving the minutes from the last meeting? All right, okay, all right, good. We can always make a post adjustment. All right, super. Thank you very much. I think we'll need a motion to adjourn.
I'll happily make the motion to adjourn.
Okay, in a second. This is non-debatable. All in favor? Against it?
Who made the motion? The second? I'm sorry, the second. Thank you.
Yeah, and Rick, okay, all in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Good, thank you. Good job, everyone.
The money you're saving. I don't think they got it through that. So that's why I wanted to say that.
That's it.
Yeah, how are ya?
Do these go to Eleanor?